Before we begin the video, I want to first welcome all of you to this channel, in which we will tell all kinds of different stories, ranging from reality to fantasy. Some are based on true stories, some are true stories, and some could be outright untrue. But we hope that you'll enjoy your time here. I want to take a quick moment to thank each and every person from my friends, family, and especially one person who encouraged me to go through and forward with this channel. You know who you are. I'm speaking directly to you. So thank you for your words of encouragement and empowerment, and giving me that little push that I needed in order to finally launch this channel. I've been wanting to do this for quite some time now. Let's begin with the story. Back in March of 2015, spring break was slowly approaching, and I was looking forward to spending my 2-week vacation from college, lazing around and playing video games. At the time, I was playing a video game called Yakuza 3, and during the events of the game, especially in the beginning portion, it focuses a lot on an ex-Yakuza man who is taking care of an orphanage and looking out after the children there, dealing with their problems, and so on and so forth. A small part of me wanted that in some way, and it was a feel-good period type of thing for me, as it was set in a very quiet town in the Okinawan region of Japan. Overall, the game was very enjoyable and relaxing, and I was looking forward to playing the sequels during my spring break. Before our vacation began, I got a call from one of the guys that I had barely befriended in college, and we clicked and got along very well. We were fast friends, to say the least. He told me about a student's trip that the college is conducting in order to visit and help out an orphanage. And that orphanage was located in Nepal, and specifically the Pokhara region of the country. He and a mutual friend that we have were very adamant about me traveling with them. And to be honest, I was not too excited about the trip, as I wanted or would prefer to spend my spring break simply playing games and not doing anything. However, a small part of me was inspired by the video game that I first mentioned, and I wanted to experience something new, and maybe even do something productive with my time, and have a new experience, especially with the new guys that I had befriended, and explore a culture and country that I have never been to before, something that was new to me. So I agreed to the trip and was interviewed by the chaperone that would accompany us on the trip. We got everything settled, and then we waited for the day of our trip. On the day of our flight, we assembled at the college and grouped up with the rest of the people and chaperones traveling with us. It was a medium-sized group consisting of around roughly 30 people, maybe more or less. We flew out, and once we landed and got off the plane, you could feel the smog in the air, and it was a little difficult to breathe, as I've never experienced the smog like that before in the air. As we were going through customs, the lights suddenly went out, and as a result of an electric short circuit, which was a little funny looking back on the situation. We got our things, regrouped outside, and took our transportation to the hotel that we would be staying at for the night, before heading out to Pokhara. Keep in mind, we of course landed in the capital of Kathmandu. The next day we woke up and had our breakfast, prepared ourselves, and headed to the domestic airport to fly out, and what would be a 40-minute flight in a small plane felt almost like an eternity. During this short plane ride, we came across some very vicious turbulence that even to the point made the stewardess fall over, but luckily she held on to one of the seats to break her fall. That little flight was quite an experience. I mean, it was convenient, but at the same time, it was a little dangerous. We finally landed and took the bus waiting for us to the hostel that we'd be staying at, which was around a 10-minute walk maybe from the orphanage that we would be helping out in. We had a warm and lovely greeting from the people working at the hostel, and they gave us a nice meal after that. Then we decided to walk around and explore the area that we were staying at and sit down at a cafe and enjoy a cup of coffee. The following day, we went to the orphanage as a group for our first ever visit, and we were greeted by the lovely children and the director of the orphanage. We got to know them and what their hobbies were, their likes and dislikes, their dreams for the future, their ambitions and aspirations, among other things. And we also met some lovely people from other countries that had come over to visit and help out at the orphanage as well. As the days went by, we would head over to the orphanage every day basically for one activity or another. We did some awesome things such as trekking, horse riding, canoeing. One of the highlights for me was the paragliding, which was very tiring and nerve-wracking. It was awesome fun, and I was lucky that the person in charge of my little paragliding session was not able to spiral land. Otherwise, I would have felt sick the whole day as my friend did, who unfortunately had the awesome yet nauseating experience of a spiral landing. We even had a little incident where one of our group members had the horse go crazy and buck him off its back. We immediately rushed him to the hospital, but thankfully he didn't sustain any critical or serious injuries, only minor ones. Up to this point, this lovely trip is everything that I could ask for and more, and I was having a wonderful time exploring the culture, trying new foods, befriending the children, helping them out and getting to know them, as well as befriending the other people outside of our group that had come over to help out at the orphanage as well. Enjoying the awesome weather and nature that the country had to offer. But there was a very dark, lingering feeling, and something was off about the whole situation. Something that we couldn't help but notice. Now, I need to rewind a bit for this, as I intentionally saved the darker side of the trip for last. During our stay, we couldn't help but notice some very odd and obvious inconsistencies during our trip. It all started when I asked one of the children where the restroom was, and the child pointed me to a certain restroom, and when I entered, it was awfully dirty, and I doubt that even an animal would go inside. It was that bad. They then pointed me to one of their bathrooms in the children's room because I refused to use the previous one. And when I went over to check it, to my absolute surprise, the bathroom itself was not even functioning or working at all. I couldn't help but feel bewildered at what I'd seen. Here's the real kicker though. When I bluntly and explicitly specified to the children that I needed to use a clean bathroom, they told me to use the director's bathroom, and when I went up there, it was the cleanest bathroom that I've been to since I visited the country. It was even cleaner than the hotel that I stayed at, and the hostel as well. I could see my own reflection on the toilet. I was absolutely stunned about that. It wasn't only that, we slowly started to discover certain things that we couldn't help but notice. Other things such as the hostel that we were staying at belonged to the orphanage director, and the restaurant that we were eating at also belonged to him. Not to mention the paragliding company and the horse riding stables that we that we used, it was so weird and inconsistent, so hypocritical to a certain point. The guy even owned a Land Cruiser, which in that country means that you're basically a big shot, since everyone or most of the people there who are doing well enough or barely even scraping by only own motorbikes. But this guy owns so many things, and the Land Cruiser is his personal vehicle. This not only bewildered us but angered us, and we kept asking ourselves, if you have the capacity and the ability to own all these things, but yet why can't you even fix the bathroom to the children's rooms? However, we only started to discover this basically near the end of the trip. We'd even discovered that some of the children were technically not even real orphans. Some of them had families, but they would temporarily stay at the orphanage, which made us scratch our heads at what was going on. I remember during the final night that we were staying at the orphanage, they had prepared dinner for us, and they set the foods, and I had my dinner, but I noticed that my friends from the group were not around. So I finished my food and headed out to find them standing outside, and I asked them, why didn't you guys eat dinner? So they told me that they'd refused to eat because one of the children mentioned to them that sometimes they don't even have enough food and sometimes they go to bed without having anything. This was seriously disturbing. The following day, we prepared ourselves to head back to the capital in which we would be flying out from. We went for one final visit to the orphanage and said goodbye to the children, and then we got on the bus and started heading on a road trip that would last 7 hours towards Kathmandu. This was the longest 7 hours of my life, as we came across very, very narrow roads that would spiral around a mountainside, cars that would overtake, and trucks and buses that would pop out face to face when we were about to make a turn. It was crazy. Looking back at it, it was fun, but during that time, it was a nerve-wracking experience to say the least. There is one fascinating thing that I can't help but chuckle at when I remember it, and because the roads were very narrow and sometimes the bus that we were on would need to reverse and position itself properly in order to make a turn, so that what would happen is one guy would exit the bus and would calculate and communicate with the driver by knocking on the bus, and depending on how many knocks he would do, the driver would understand when to reverse, when to stop, when to turn, when to go forward and backwards. So that was a very fascinating and crazy thing to witness. Once we reached the capital and settled in for our final night before our flight back home, we discovered that the college was planning for future annual trips to the orphanage, which was honestly concerning for us, given the situation that we'd witnessed. We promised ourselves that we would bring the subject to the attention of the people in charge at the college, and once we reached home, and help them understand the situation and what we witnessed during our trip there. The next day came and we flew out back home. We reminisced about the lovely trip that we had, of course, besides the darker side to the trip, and when we went back to college, we immediately contacted the proper figures and to inform them of the situation that we'd witnessed, and they decided to cancel any future trips or even considerations to conducting any trips to Nepal in the foreseeable future. This experience opened our eyes to another side of the whole orphanage situation that we couldn't even fathom. I won't go into too much detail, but basically, according to a report, supposedly 80% of the orphanages in Nepal are bogus orphanages. And this is actually some kind of widespread phenomenon in that part of the world, but don't take my word for it. You can look it up and render your own judgment, but this is what I remember from that time. One of the things that would happen is they would gather children into an orphanage, even if they had families, and they would ask that the children stay with them, and they would pay the families so that they could gather donations from good-hearted people that simply wanted to help out orphanages and misfortunate children. All in all, It was a wonderful experience for the most part, and it made me appreciate what I have in general, and that inspired me to help others out and try to be the best version of myself that I could be. That is the end of our tale. Thank you, and we hope to see you again soon. Ta ta.